you. Yes, the great Michelle, who is always great at helping us set these up and helping keep us on track throughout. So thank you to Extended Learning. And of course, this is also supported by the Behavioral Workforce grant that the College of Education and the College of Health and Human Services has. And that's how we are able to host Dr. Debbie Joffe Ellis, who did some workshops for us before about a month ago, I think, maybe a little longer. And everyone liked it so much and they wanted to hear more because it was a 2-hour session that we invited her back for another one. I believe some of you were there. And of course, as you heard her talking about, she really comes from the REBT perspective, which her late husband was, of course, the creator of. And I doubt too many of you got to see him when he was alive. I did have the pleasure of seeing him though at a networker conference, and it was pretty awesome to see him in person. But I've also worked with Dr. Debbie Joffe Ellis on some videos, training videos and things like that. So I had the pleasure of knowing her more in depth also, and all of her expertise, which is why I had invited her. She's world renowned. She teaches, she does workshops, she does all kinds of things, and books and publications. And so we're very lucky to have her. And I know you will learn a lot today from her. So I won't take up any more of her time. I could keep going on with kudos. I will turn it over to Dr. Joffe Ellis.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Shannon or Dr. Derma. And as I was saying earlier, while people were joining this get together, I'm so grateful and delighted to be with you all again. And a few people in particular that I'd like to thank, in addition to Dr. Derma, who's so much in the REBT corner, and of course contributes broadly to various aspects of psychotherapy and psychology. And GSU is so fortunate to have her as part of the team. And so thank you for inviting me back. Michelle Savasco, with all your tech knowledge and know-how and really making this literally technically possible. Thank you. All at the Governor's State University School of Extended Learning, as Dr. Derma said, whose contribution has also contributed to making this possible, and to the people providing the BHWET grant. Yes, allowing all of us to be here, all of you to be here at no charge. So, yay, I'm just gonna put my gallery view on. Could you let me, how many of you were not here for the first part of, so Latanya, 3, 4, 5, oh dear. And of the 5 of you, how many of you know something about REBT? None of you. Okay.
I used to live in New York City, and I took some classes and sessions at the New York Center.
Okay. So you have some, I've met a little bit as well. I highly recommend, if this is okay with Dr. Derma and Michelle, to get hold of the YouTube video of the first one that I did, in which I talked about the basics of REBT, and also had the opportunity to do a demonstration with Erica, who I'm sad isn't so far, at least, with us tonight. But I've been thinking of her. She was very brave in bringing up a very raw and painful issue. And the blessing for me participating with her in that demonstration was that I witnessed within a short time a very significant change, where she was allowing herself to feel emotions that had not come up before and that were important to allow. And my hunch is that those of you who viewed it were inspired and moved as well. So for me, it was the pleasure of seeing yet again how effective REBT can be in a short time. And also to see a beautiful hearted human being open up and let some healing and expression of grief complete itself, or be on the path to, I don't know if it's completion is the wrong word, but just movement along on the grief journey to acceptance. So if any of you know Erica, please give her my best wishes and tell her she's been in my thoughts and is in my heart. Okay, so I have pages in front of me. A reminder here, please, particularly if I'm going to do a demonstration tonight, while I'm speaking with the volunteer, to make sure that your microphones are off, that you're on mute. Last time when I was demonstrating with Erica, someone mistakenly would turn it on and turn it off, and you know, we're talking about the death of her son, and it was somewhat distracting, I have to say. So mistakes happen, accidents happen, that's why I'm mentioning it. All right, so what's the plan for tonight, I say, as I look at the pages in front of me. Here we go. So as I mentioned before, and those of you who were here, which is about 2/3 of you last time we looked at the basics of REBT. Real quickly, elevator description. It's not what happens that creates our emotions, but what we tell ourselves about what happens that creates our emotional experience. When we think in rational ways in response to adversity or difficulty, did I say rational? Yes, I did. We create healthy negative emotions. When we think in irrational ways in response to dire events, brutality, not getting what we want, we create debilitating, unhealthy emotions. One of the many delightful gifts of REBT is that it distinguishes between healthy and unhealthy negative emotions. You know, and negative in this context doesn't mean bad, it means they're not so pleasant, but they're enriching, they can be motivating, and they're part of the tapestry of human life, the privilege of being a human and being able to feel emotion. And so we want the healthy negative ones. When things are bad or brutal, or we lose someone or someone's we love, or a chapter in our lives that was precious is over. So the healthy negative emotions that we create when we think in rational ways include concern, which is motivating, sadness, disappointment, and grief, which is healthy. Healthy anger. What's healthy anger? It is fueled from our moral compass. It comes from a place of preferring justice. And so when we either witness or receive injustice, it's that often adrenaline fuel that comes up, but we know it's healthy when we are not impelled to react. When we choose to, when possible, it's not always possible, but it's often possible, to pause. What's the best thing to do now? Run for the hills, call 911, speak to the person, go do a workout, do some yoga. You know, we assess, we choose our behavior. We don't blindly react. Then continuing the healthy negative emotions, when we think in healthy ways, we experience regret. Again, this is connected to our moral compass. And if we have, as the fallible humans that we are, made a mistake, acted badly, failed at something, it's important to regret it. That increases the probability or possibility that we may not repeat the bad behavior or the mistakes. And when we regret, we are still able to remind ourselves or have the experience that my bad behavior doesn't mean I'm bad. We distinguish between our worth as a person, which is constant. REBT reminds us that every human being has worth simply because we exist, just like every other form of nature. Now, humans are capable of doing good things and evil things and lots of things in between. But REBT, in its embrace of the wisdom of general semantics, reminds us that no one is good, because that means semantically they only ever do good things. No one is evil. It would mean they only ever do evil things. No, there are people who do evil acts or good acts. REBT certainly is all for justice. It is humanistic to the core, and it would certainly encourage us, when possible, to seek justice when evil behavior has occurred. But seeking just actions for evil actions can still include, if we choose, our willingness to see the perpetrator as a disturbed human being who did evil things. So they're the healthy negative emotions that we create when we think in rational ways. The opposite, when we think in irrational ways, we create anxiety, panic, fear instead of healthy, motivating concern. We create hopelessness, one of the root causes of suicide. Hopelessness, despondency, depression, instead of healthy sadness, disappointment, and grief. We create rage, which more often than not seems to do more harm and no good. Rage instead of healthy anger. And finally, when we think in irrational ways, instead of healthy regret, we create guilt and shame, which fuel feelings of worthlessness. And those emotions and attitudes are also there in people who attempt suicide. So finally, this is my boy. This must be like a building of 3,000 stories, because I said this is my elevator description of the basics. But because there are a few of you who weren't here last week, just very quickly, irrational thinking. We have demands, shoulds, musts, oughts, 3 core irrational beliefs from which countless others spring. Our I must do well and be loved, liked, approved of by everyone. You must treat me well and act, behave the way I think you should. Josephine, can you turn your mic off, please? Thank you. And this this tendency, you must treat me well, act the way I think you should, that's behind hatred and wars and terrorism, where a group of people who embrace a certain philosophy or religion or belief demand that everyone acts and believes the way they think they should. And then the third core irrational belief from which countless others spring is life should be fair and with justice. So when we think in irrational ways, those rigid, inflexible demands, we have low frustration tolerance. I must have what I want when I want it, little baby that I am. Take things too seriously, blow things out of perspective, no humor. We catastrophize, we authorize, meaning that we tell ourselves this is the worst it could possibly be. And frankly, if a person has the ability to think that, then it surely isn't the worst it possibly could be. It could be very, very bad, but not the worst. And when we think in irrational ways, we think in absolutistic ways, overgeneralize, always, you always, or I'll never be able, And finally, we damn ourselves and others and life when things don't go the way we think they should. So I hope as I describe that, for those of you who are new, and a reminder to those who are here in February, when I say here, like at the presentation on REBT, it's clear how thinking in that way can create those unhealthy emotions. And when we think in rational ways, the opposite to everything I just said, we have preferences, goals, desires. It's important and helpful to have goals in life. But when we really, really, really want something and we don't get it, we're likely to make ourselves feel sad, disappointed, might have some grief, but we won't make ourselves hopeless or depressed or enraged. You know? So we have preferences, wants, wishes, a sense of humor. We keep things in perspective. We have high frustration tolerance. We remind ourselves we can stand what we don't like. We just don't like it. We don't catastrophize, we don't authorize, we don't think in absolutistic ways or stereotype or overgeneralize. And three things that are emphasized strongly in REBT, more than in any other cognitive approach. The encouragement for each one of us to make an effort to experience and express unconditional self-acceptance. Again, we remind ourselves we are worthy just because we exist. Secondly, unconditional other acceptance, that other people, we're willing to accept that they have worth. It doesn't mean we accept bad behavior, but in a way we can have compassion, best case forgiveness, which is humanly possible, though it is a choice in many cases. Some people are born quite saintly, but a lot of us have to work on having healthy attitudes when people do evil things. But it's worth it. It's really worth it. And so to remind ourselves, well, the person who committed the evil action is clearly extremely disturbed, you know, there, but for the grace of whatever my brain chemistry and circumstances are and were that are different from theirs, thankfully I don't or didn't act like that. And finally, we have unconditional life acceptance. You know, now with COVID and in the past year, more people experiencing anxiety and depression. And my hunch is that some of them are possibly thinking, this is awful, this is terrible, I can't stand it, it shouldn't be happening, it's the worst. And that fuels those unhealthy negative emotions. Those of us who haven't, thankfully, suffered emotionally, who have experienced healthy emotions such as sadness and grief, in all probability, accept in life sometimes devastating things can happen. You know, there are floods, there are hurricanes, there are tsunamis, there are viruses. And so we're willing to watch that we're not damning all of life because some things in life are extremely tough. So anyway, that was the elevated description of a multi-thousand story building elevator ride. And so tonight I will talk about or describe the tools and techniques of REBT, or at least the main ones. And I believe you will have or have the handout mentioning or naming them. We'll look at unique qualities of REBT, some pivotal aspects of REBT therapy, depending on how much time, a quick or slower version of the history and development of REBT. I hope to have time to answer any questions. So please either put in the chat or later on ask in real time any questions. If there's a volunteer, I'd love to do another live demonstration. So that is the plan. The objectives, for those of you getting C points, I believe this does provide them. And so it's important for me to fulfill the objectives. So it's my hope that by the end of our time together, you'll be able to perhaps not describe without looking at notes, but understand and identify cognitive, behavioral, and emotive techniques in REBT, to discuss unique elements of REBT and know of the unique elements regarding the history and development of rational emotive behavior therapy. Okay, so let us begin with tools and techniques. Starting with the cognitive ones. So there are three broad areas: cognitive, emotive, and behavioral. And as you'll hear, some of them kind of intersect. You know, some of them really are a combination of cognitive and emotive, or a combination of all three. So what, right? But they are, just for the sake of distinguishing broadly, we have these three main categories. So starting with cognitive, and one of the most well-known cognitive tools and techniques shared in REBT is one that we went over last week, and that is the ABCDE of REBT, the self-help form. I believe that's one of your handouts as well. If you don't already have it, maybe Michelle will send it out later. And it gives a beautiful structure for any person who wants to self-help, or a therapist who wants to, oh, thanks, Michelle, the handouts are in the chat, there you go. Anyone who's a therapist who wants to share these, or who's an educator, this can be shared with students or with loved ones who want to play an active role in getting into the habit of, number one, not creating unhealthy emotions, and number two, creating healthy ones. How? By thinking in healthy ways. So the ABCDE, a quick reminder: if a person recognizes they're experiencing one of the unhealthy emotions and behaving in an unhealthy way, you know, let's say they stopped drinking for a while and that was their goal, and then they relapsed, or smoking or drug use, or whatever bad behavior, overeating. Yeah? So REBT certainly is not only for changing unhealthy thinking habits that lead to the unhealthy negative emotions, but also is helpful in changing unhealthy behaviors. So anyway, when we do the ABCDE, A stands for activating event or adversity, the thing that happened that seems to have created the unhealthy emotion. I say seems because it didn't create the unhealthy emotion. What did? The irrational beliefs. So anyway, you just very, without elaborating, write down the A. What happened that seemed to create the emotion, and if it exists, also an unhealthy behavior. And then you go to C, which stands for consequence, and you name, I'm going to focus primarily on the emotional consequence. So you name any unhealthy negative emotion. If you've experienced a healthy negative emotion, frankly, there's probably no benefit in changing that other than accepting that it's healthy and let it be. But write down any unhealthy negative emotion. Also, any unhealthy behaviors that you want to change. But often there aren't, and it's just the emotions, and that's what I'm going to focus on tonight anyway. Okay, and then you go to B, which is the detective work, and you identify as many irrational beliefs as possible. And then D, fabulous, fabulous D, which allows us not just to replace an unhealthy idea with a healthy one, but to zap the destructive irrational beliefs by eliminating any credibility And we do this in D by D stands for disputing. We ask questions of every irrational belief that we've identified. Where is it written that whatever, whatever? Is it helping or hurting to think this? Where is the evidence? Can I really not stand it? Does it follow from my preferences? So we question each belief. And as a consequence, we create E, which stands for effective new rational beliefs or effective new philosophies. And they're not, excuse the French, bullshitty kind of everything's for the best, romantic. No, no, no. The manner of REBT is realistic optimism. Realistic optimism. So the effective new beliefs could include something like, I can stand what I don't like, I just don't like it. Or, you know, I have the resilience to cope with this and I can take it a step at a time. Or, you know, it would be tailored according to the activating event. And so once one has these effective new beliefs, it's highly recommended to write them down and read them every day, many times a day for at least 30 days. Why at least 30 days? Neuroplasticity research has proven that that's probably a minimum amount of time that it takes for many people to develop new neural pathways in the brain to replace the old ones that by doing the disputation, we've knocked credibility out of anyway. We don't so much believe them as firmly anymore, hopefully, or at all. So repetition, repetition, repetition. I don't remember if I mentioned this last time. I may have, but just in case I didn't, I live not far from Carnegie Hall, and there's this New York joke that musical artists and all, they strive to succeed, and if you perform at Carnegie Hall, that proves you really made it. You know, you can make it there. And so there's this kind of joke that a tourist is in New York City and stops and asks a New Yorker who happens to be a musician, please, can you tell me how I get to Carnegie Hall? And the musician says, practice, practice, practice. You know, so the tourist just wanted directions, but the musician gave the tourist a little REBT, ongoing effort, ongoing effort, ongoing effort. So anyway, now with COVID, no performances in the past year, and I walked past recently and there was a big sign in front of Carnegie Hall, and it said on top, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Patience, patience, patience. And that's REBT as well. The REBT lingo is high frustration tolerance. I can stand waiting. I may not like it, so I don't like it. I can stand it. Okay, so that's the ABCDE self-help form of REBT. Another, you might say, cognitive tool technique of REBT is mindfulness. REBT is probably the pioneering contemporary mindfulness psychotherapy. You know, there is a therapy around in recent decades called mindfulness psychotherapy, and it, like elements of REBT, has influences of Eastern and Stoic philosophy. So anyway, back to REBT techniques. So the reminder to oneself to be aware, to be mindful, to be willing to think about one's thinking. And one of the homework activities I sometimes suggest to some of my clients is, in terms of developing greater mindfulness, is to either set their alarm on their phone or a clock in the house to go off 3 or 4 times a day, at least, let's say, for a month. And when it goes off, to ask oneself, What am I thinking now? What am I feeling now? What's my body doing now? What sensation is there? What's my body language conveying? And so that exercise 3 or 4 times a day for at least a month can get a person in the habit, if you're not already in the habit, of just checking in, not only on your thinking, but holistically. What am I experiencing? What might I be conveying? Some people, I first heard this expression about 5 years ago. It may have been around a lot longer and I just didn't hear it. Resting bitch face. Very crude expression, right? But no one's offended. But hey, it's common. And there are some people who aren't aware that when they're not talking, or their face just may look kind of like it's disapproving or critical or negative. And with awareness, they really can change their resting facial expression, but with awareness. So that's another thing that REBT encourages, mindfulness. Okay, then another cognitive, and as I said earlier, this also is emotive, so combination. But anyway, actively adopting attitudes of unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional other acceptance, and unconditional life acceptance. And then related to that, another so-called cognitive activity we can do is to talk about unconditional acceptance or other helpful elements of REBT to other people, not necessarily in a therapeutic setting, to our friends, to our family members, in a language that doesn't sound academic or therapeutic, but the principles are very common sense, common sense from head and heart. And the more often we share it with others, it kind of builds up the muscle within us of those principles and makes it easier for us to apply them to ourselves. Then another cognitive tool or technique is to look out for, to identify secondary symptoms. What's a secondary symptom? Anxiety about anxiety, depression about depression, shame about shame, guilt about guilt, rage about rage. So it's that unhealthy emotion that's directed to that unhealthy emotion within us or within the client. So if one recognizes a secondary symptom, one targets that first before going back to the primary one. And how one does that is through normalizing it, through having compassion. For example, let's say I'm working with a client and the main issue, the primary disturbance is or was anxiety. And we've talked about homework they do and they come back the next week and the week after and either they haven't really done the homework or they've done it, but they're still feeling anxious. And so they're anxious about the fact that they're still feeling anxious. And so the ways of not only reducing, but eliminating that secondary disturbance, anxiety about the anxiety would be, first of all, say, and to be truthful, and what I'm about to share with you that I would say to a client is truthful. To normalize, say something like, it's very common, it's very common. And you've been thinking the things that make you anxious for so many years, and you've only been doing REBT for this amount of time. And so, what are you telling yourself to expect that you should be over it so quickly? Yeah? And then, so with that normalizing, compassion, unconditional other acceptance, demonstrate that, model that, and if appropriate, self-disclose. As I think I mentioned last time, REBT is not against self-disclosure, but only encourages self-disclosure of therapist to client only for the benefit of the client, not because it's an interesting story or whatever, but it gives them a living example. Let's say that you've survived something similar to that, or a similar degree of intense whatever, and that you, the therapist, overcame it by doing this particular REBT technique. Again, honesty. I'm not in any way suggesting you make something up. If you don't have an experience, then you don't disclose anything. But that's sometimes helpful if there is an experience that you, the therapist, has overcome successfully through the use of REBT, and you serve as a model of what's possible for the client. Okay, so anyway, usually I've not had an experience, I have to say, luckily till now, where doing that has not reduced and eliminated the secondary disturbance. And once that's done, we get back to the primary one. And what are you telling yourself to make yourself anxious? Okay, then the next cognitive one is technique tool. Assess the cost-benefit ratio of hanging on to irrational beliefs or self-rating, self-damning, or other damning or life-damning. Where is that getting me? Is it that question again? Is it helping me or hurting me? What's the benefit of it, if any? Usually there's not much, if any. What's the cost? Usually plenty. So that's very helpful. Then another cognitive one is using distraction methods. Now, I'd like to distinguish between what REBT calls elegant and inelegant solutions or techniques. The elegant ones in REBT, it's not about, having poise and how you look. It's getting to the root cause of the disturbance. Cherche le should, look for the should, the must, the ought, and any other elements of irrational thinking. And then dispute, replace. An inelegant solutions, such as distraction methods, can be very helpful in the short term. But it's important to recognize they don't get to the root cause. They can be good in the short term. Sometimes it's important and helpful to bide some time till a person is in a greater state, let's say, of mental clarity to apply the elegant techniques. Does that make sense? So one pretty clear example is if a person is enraged. If you're trying to help that person, I would not suggest in that moment of rage that they do their A, B, C, D, E, or you better run for the hills. Okay? At that point, it would be better to suggest, or better for the person to do something that distracts them, lets off steam. Does that make sense? Or let's say someone is at work and feeling intense anxiety, and it wouldn't be appropriate to do an A, B, C, D, E at that point. But perhaps they could go to the bathroom and meditate for 3 minutes. So a distraction method to just ease the energy somewhat. And then it's recommended as soon as practically possible, do one of the elegant techniques that get to the root cause. Okay, another cognitive is modeling. Modeling and Albert Bandura is credited for doing fantastic research, decades ago, and writing about the benefits and helpfulness and impact of modeling. So a therapist can act as a model, in other words, demonstrate unconditional other acceptance. And that's a model that the client can often use to help them give themselves unconditional self-acceptance, if that's one of the foci, whatever the English word is, of the therapy. It can be helpful. A homework I've often give clients, again, depending on what the therapeutic goals are, who might be suffering post-traumatic stress, they've endured extreme trauma. I ask them to, over the week, before they see me next time, just investigate, write down people who have been through brutal situations and have hung in there, and then not only survived but flourished and thrived and went on to create meaningful lives. And so it can be famous people like Nelson Mandela and others who were imprisoned or afflicted in some ways, persecuted and yet persisted, survivors of wars and so on, who went on to even use their misfortunes to offer hope to people of survival. Viktor Frankl's book, by the way, he's another example of having survived the horrors of 5 years in concentration camp, but made a choice, and it is a choice, to find meaning in his life every day, whether it's looking at a crack of blue through the wall, the sky, or looking at ants. My parents survived 5 years in concentration camps, and it was, I'm sure, hope that largely contributed to their surviving hell upon hell during that time. So yeah, and when you ask your clients to find models, it could be their grandma or grandpa or someone down the road, or Harriet Tubman, or just modeling. Okay. Then another REBT cognitive suggestion is the use of bibliography or videography. Be aware of books that pertain to issues that the client is wanting to overcome, and if they like reading, recommend books. Similarly, videos, and happily in recent years, with the goal of destigmatizing mental illness, there are more and more Hollywood productions and Netflix series that shed the light with compassion and offer understanding of various forms of mental illness. And so know what's available to recommend to your client or clients to watch, to reinforce what they're learning through you, through your help, through REBT therapy. And then a couple more under the cognitive banner. Choosing, it's a choice, choosing to focus on what's good and positive with realistic optimism every day. It's a choice. I mentioned it already earlier with regard to mindfulness and even before that. But making a concerted, conscious effort to make that a habit. It's possible. I wrote an article, oh goodness, if Michelle, you could remind me, I will email it to you for you to send to our attendees. And it's about gratitude. It was published a few years ago in the APA Journal of, what's it called? I think I forgot what it's called, and it's probably somewhere on this huge bookcase. Anyway, the Journal of Counseling and Spirituality. It's an APA journal on spirituality. Anyway, and I wrote an article on gratitude, and long story short, I've been in the habit. I do my best to practice what I preach. Obviously, still a work in progress, but oh, it's helped me a lot. You know, like many of you, there have been some really difficult situations in my life, and I know without any doubt that I would have suffered immeasurably more if I were not using the tools of REBT. Lucky me to have learnt them way back in Australia when I was studying psychology at university there. And by the way, I'm not just preaching Albert Ellis's work because I was married to the man. I was teaching and practicing it way back in Melbourne, Australia, beautiful Melbourne. You know, after I graduated and was teaching and had my license and all, I loved it because it's the most holistic. It's no nonsense, no bullshit, pragmatic, scientific, imbued with heart and compassion. So anyway, in this article, maybe I'll remember, but if I don't, someone remind me. I talk about the fact that I've been doing daily gratitude for as many years as I can even remember, very little. And it's a habit, it's a go-to. I wasn't born saintly, I don't think, but it's a habit that I love. And by the way, I was very lucky because my parents, who I just mentioned, who survived hell, you know, so they went to Australia after the war, started a new life. My older brother was born in me. And I was blessed because gratitude was around me all the time. My parents cherished the smallest to the largest gifts of life, you know, be it in nature or enjoyment of friends and good values. So I was very fortunate. It was modeled for me. Anyway, so gratitude. I was walking by the Hudson River and pointing there because that is west. And I live very near the Hudson River. And my therapy is walking by the Hudson as often as possible. And long story short, I keep saying that, it's already a long story. I'm sorry, but it does have relevance. So there's a shared walking and bike path, and I was diligently walking on the walking path, and a speeding bike barreled into me, and back I flipped and banged my head on concrete, and I lost consciousness for a little while and suffered concussion. But anyway, I regained it and sat up. Of course, I was somewhat stunned. To his credit, the cyclist waited, and because he could have just gone away, but that wouldn't have been too good for his soul and guilt and all of that, I presume. Anyway, after sitting up and realizing that, yeah, I'm stunned and this hurts, but nothing seemed to be broken, my first emotion that I remember was an attitude and thought was gratitude, that it could have been so much worse. And the fact that that came up, and frankly, I could have been killed. I don't know whether there are angels that were cushioning my fall, because it was bang on concrete. And maybe there was some brain damage, but I'm still able to work. So, anyway, it's because of habitual repetition. And, you know, the guy was like, sorry, I get in a zone and blah, blah, blah. And it's not that I was in la la land. I stepped in very firmly, but I wasn't angry. That was the other thing I was kind of in awe about. I said firmly, you've got to be careful. You could have killed me. You could have killed yourself. And he's like, I'm sorry. What can I do? You all right? And I love animals. So the first thing I said was give $50 to the ASPCA. Anyway, I got up and went to hospital, but I've made my point. And so the final cognitive, although it is also emotive, and I guess behavioral, is gratitude, daily gratitude. I recommend people keep a journal if for any reason they choose not to, in the head. And I recommend it first thing in the morning and last thing at night, or whenever you go to sleep. It could be the early hours of the morning. All right, so they're the main cognitive techniques. Now the emotive ones. The first one that I'll mention is rational emotive imagery. And with rational emotive imagery, and it's important not to do this if you're working on rage, because part of it is evoking the emotion that you want to help the client change. And rage can lead to unpredictable behavior. It's better not to take the risk. But for the other unhealthy emotions, particularly effective for anxiety, guilt and shame, and depression, just not rage. It's not recommended for rage, usually. I mean, every suggestion has exceptions, and the effective therapist will make exceptions as they assess they can be useful. All right, so rational emotive imagery is where the client is already aware that it's their thinking that's creating the unhealthy emotion, not the circumstance. They're already aware of that principle. How embedded in their psyche it is yet, but they're aware of it. Okay, so let's say someone is anxious about giving a talk in public or speaking to their class. So stage fright or nervousness about public speaking. And prior to doing the rational emotive imagery, it's highly probable you, the therapist, and the client have identified the irrational beliefs that are creating that terror or anxiety. So again, there is some background knowledge there in the client. Okay, so you ask the client to close their eyes and imagine the worst. You invite them to visualize they're in the classroom and they're going to give a talk and they freeze and they have a migraine and they have the runs, they have to go to the toilet. And can you vividly imagine that? You actually best use elements that they have told you they've experienced when they felt anxious. So can you vividly imagine that, you ask? I'm getting dizzy looking at Iris ceiling. Anyway, and usually they say yes. And I ask, how do you feel? And they usually say anxious. Remember, their eyes are closed. And I say, great, feel it. Feel the anxiety, and you look at the faces of the people and they're waiting for you with expectation and they're looking at their watches. And can you imagine that vividly? Yes, I can. Then their eyes are closed. Yeah. And how do you feel? Really anxious. And I often also ask, where do you feel it? And they'll often say, oh, I feel it in my gut, or I feel it I'm clenching my jaw. So, because remember, REBT is very holistic, and it wants us to be very holistically self-informed. And then I guess I feel it. Do you feel it? Yeah. And then I say, so now what I want you to do is to turn the volume down on that anxiety. Just make it less. or if you can, get rid of it. And when you've done that, open your eyes. And in all the years I've been doing that, often when I give demonstrations, not always, but I'll do that. It's usually less than 60 seconds, and it's not ever, in my experience, been more than 2 minutes before they open their eyes. And I immediately ask them, because I've said to them, when you have achieved that, open your eyes. So they open their eyes, say, what are you feeling now? And they might say, calm, relaxed, or a little bit concerned, but not anxious. So they've opened their eyes because there's change. And I say, fantastic. How did you do that? Because you did it. I didn't tell you how to do it. You did it in less than a minute or in less than a minute and a half. How did you do it? And they'll tell me. Either they'll say something like, well, I reminded myself, what's the big deal? You know, in 5 years, this won't matter. Or so what if I do a bad job? It doesn't mean I'm going to fail. Or, you know, they talk themselves out of it. Or sometimes not as often, because I encourage changing the thinking, but they'll use humor and imagine the audience with no clothes on or whatever. I don't know, that might cause nausea instead of relief, but whatever. So they tell me how they did it. And I emphasize again, see the power you have in less than a minute by changing your thinking. You did it. I didn't do it. You did it. If you did it here, you can do it in your daily life. And then they're encouraged to do that every day, to do a rational emotive imagery every day for the next 30 days. Now, a common question about that is, what if by the second, third, or seventh day, they're imagining the situation and they don't feel anxious? Yay! Still, I recommend go through the motions of thinking those rational thoughts that change the anxiety into no anxiety. So reinforcement. Okay, the next emotive technique, which is very REBT-ish, is a shame attacking exercise. This is very helpful for people who want to overcome shyness and social anxiety, for whom it's really, really, really important that people think well of them and approve of them. So with a shame attacking exercise, they're encouraged to do something out in public or among other people that draws attention to them, nothing risky or dangerous, but that has people notice them, that gives them the opportunity to tell themselves, so what? So what? So what if they think I'm weird? I'm still alive, so what? The sun's shining. And to self-talk during the process where they acknowledge they're being noticed for being a little unusual. And it can be very liberating. An example that I often give was when my late husband, Albert Ellis, and I worked together. We gave workshops, the general public and for practitioners and all. Anyway, one weekend workshop after we'd taught the theory and all of that, we asked the participants to do a shame attacking exercise during the lunch break. And when they'd come back after the lunch break, tell us what happened. And Al is Dr. Albert Ellis. I call him Al because I was married to him. So Al, with his particular style of humor, said, when you come back, tell us what happened. If you don't come back, if you die, we'll give you a nice funeral. If you die, you die, but we'll give you a nice funeral. Humor is part of REBT. It puts things in perspective. So anyway, there was this one man, and he had been in individual therapy with my husband for a while, so he was aware of the principles, but still was inclined to feel embarrassed and shy and all. and was working on it. So what he did during the lunch break was he had a banana that he had brought for lunch, and he put a piece of string around it, and he went to Park Avenue, because the institute where my husband and I worked at the time was in the ritzy, expensive, rich part of New York City. Park Avenue is Millionaire Avenue, really, or multi-millionaire. So this man walked down or up Park Avenue, dragging the banana on the street behind him, dragging him by the string that was tied around it. And of course, people looked at him, and he's reminding himself, so what? So what? So they think I'm weird. So what? So what? Luckily, a woman stopped and said, what are you doing? And he said to her, can't you see I'm taking my banana for a walk? And she was like, went off. And he was in bliss. He was ecstatic, because he realized something he knew up here, but didn't feel here or in his gut. He realized her judgment of him didn't make him a worthless person, had really nothing to do with his worth, but was all about her judgment of how a person should act on the street or on Park Avenue. And he came back to the workshop, and he was ecstatic, and he felt liberated from the former tendency to just, be very careful so people don't notice him in a way, and not to get disapproved of. So that's shame attack. Now, for some people, what would not be perhaps a shame attack for many of us here now is some of my clients who were very, very shy. An exercise I gave them was to go to a coffee shop that was safe, that they regularly went to, a Starbucks or whatever, and to say hello to a stranger, or to say something to the barista. Again, to prove to themselves that nothing terrible happens, even if the person doesn't say hello back. And most of the people who've tried this say, it was fabulous, they smiled back or they said hello, although again, it doesn't always happen, and you prepare the client that it may not, and then you tell yourself, so what, who needs it? So that's a shame attack, very effective when used appropriately. Next emotive one is repeating the effective new beliefs or coping statements strongly, and perhaps recording them and listening to them over and over. Similarly, recording disputations of irrational beliefs strongly. Where is it written? That I can't stand it. It's hurting you. And then the effective new beliefs. And another emotive technique that can be done in therapy, either individual therapy or group therapy, is role play and reverse role play, where, let's say, a client, and this is for clients or students or group participants who have an understanding of REBT principles. And so let's say anxiety again is the thing. And so I'll say to anxious Jenny, okay, Jenny, you be me and I'm going to be you. And we do role play, and I enact anxious Jenny, or just an anxious person. And I'll say, you be the therapist. So it's not kind of personified in terms of me or them, but in general. And that can be really helpful. Now, REBT encourages flexibility, and that includes in creating homework. And so something that perhaps in the past may not have been considered classic REBT homework, but I use it whenever relevant, is to encourage artistically inclined, it doesn't mean professional artists, but just people who like drawing or expressing through drawing, to make posters of some of the new rational beliefs that they want to make their habitual default go-tos. And with permission, I want to show you one that one of my clients did. And I think it's so beautiful, and she adores it, and it's up on her wall, and she's going to make it her Christmas card. Anyway, this was the new rational belief, new at the time, getting older now, luckily, that she wanted to voluntarily brainwash herself with. And it is, I can stand what I don't like. I just don't like it. And there's a photo of, a diagram of her. She has beautiful curly hair like that, holding her heart. Huh? And again, I show you don't know who she is nor her name, so, and I have her permission, so I'm not portraying confidentiality, and these are various other posters that she's done, that she put up around her place, that she looks at every day. So that's the final emotive suggestion. And now finally, in my description of tools and techniques in REBT, behavioral. So the first one that I'll mention is risk taking and in vivo desensitization, where a person pushes themselves to do, underline do, take action, behave, to do perhaps uncomfortably what they wanted or want to get comfortable at. So in terms of overcoming shyness, pushing themselves to say hello to a stranger in a safe environment. The famous story, I forget if I mentioned it last time in February, but of my late husband, who, when he was in college, late teen, early teen, very, very shy, but wanted to go on dates with women, and yet too afraid to ask any female out on a date. So he gave himself the homework of talking to 100 women over the month of August during the day in the Bronx Botanical Gardens, which was near where he worked, telling himself, if I die, I die, of course, not really believing he would, but to expose himself, in vivo desensitization, risk-taking. So anyway, talked to 100 women, made one date, she didn't show up, but he overcame his fear because he saw not only nothing terrible happen, but he had some nice conversations. So then the next behavioral would be using reinforcements. This can be used, for example, if one has chosen to do an ABCDE form every day for a month. And to encourage that, a positive reinforcement might be keeping in mind something pleasant they like to do every day. Let's say have a chocolate or hear music. And so for the month that the person wanted to do the homework, no music, no chocolate, no whatever, till after they do the homework. So the use of positive reinforcements. And then reinforcement penalties. I probably use them less than my husband did, but whatever. And an example would be that my husband would often talk about people who wanted to stop smoking. And so, but then, their willpower waned and they picked up another smoke or whatever. So my husband would say, every time that you are tempted to have a cigarette or that you have a cigarette, burn $100 bill or send it to the political party you detest. Some negative reinforcement. And that could be helpful. I used something like that with a client who called himself an alcoholic. I don't prefer labeling people, but a lot of people who have suffered from that addiction problem call themselves alcoholics. So he did, and yet he'd been sober for many years, but he came to see me because he feared he was going to start drinking again. And so I asked him to tell me his worst memory from his drinking days. And he had no trouble remembering that he, one morning, he was woken. He was lying in the gutter in front of his house. Pants were soaked with urine. He didn't remember the night before. He didn't remember how he got there. And he was woken up by his little children. Daddy, daddy, daddy. So I said, whenever you feel like having a drink, if you're earnest about not wanting to drink, remember that. And that really helped him. So then another behavioral activity is skill training. This is one of the inelegant techniques because it doesn't get to the root cause, but it can be very helpful. For example, people who are afraid of speaking in public, take a public speaking course, develop a skill. It doesn't attack the shoulds and musts, and it would be awful if, but it's still very helpful in addition to the elegant techniques. And the final one, two more, relapse prevention. So this is more for behavioral issues that you're helping someone with. Let's say they're overeating and their therapeutic goal is to eat less. So relapse prevention, get rid of all the unhealthy food that's in the house and replace it with healthy food. Don't have, bare pantry. So taking action to prevent relapse. Okay, then use of humor. I mentioned earlier, and there's a ton of research that demonstrates the benefit of humor in terms of effective therapy. Of course, it depends on the issue and the person. And if someone's suffering from raw grief, I would probably not recommend it. But then, with some clients who are taking things or themselves too seriously, humor. And often in workshops, Al and I and the attendees from the gang, like you're the gang, would sing humorous, rational songs. Again, the goal being to not take things too seriously, to acknowledge human fallibility. And one of the handouts that you have contains 3 of the rational, humorous songs that my late husband wrote. And I'm not talented as a singer. I enjoy it, but I won't give up my day job. And I think, Shannon, you, requested or encouraged me to sing a song, which I will. And I'm going to sing a song that isn't on your, yes, did you? Yeah.
Did I request a song? Is that what you said?
That was suggest that I sing a rational, humorous song.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I like it.
Oh, okay. Not intending to torture anyone, but an example of a shame attack. And it's not one of the songs that you have. And if we have time later, which being realistic, though I'm optimistic we may not have, but if there's time, we can all sing a song together. But maybe we can now. I'll start though. And this is a song that sheds light on the human tendency to get a little too self-absorbed and to damn other people who are very self-absorbed and just have a sense of humor. So here it comes. Be prepared to block your ears if I'm way off pitch. It's to the tune, my husband wrote the lyrics to the tune of Funiculi Funicular. Here we go. Some think that you are not the goddamn greatest, and so do I. Oops, and so do I. Some think that you come in the very latest, and so do I, and so do I. For I really hate your self-inflation and find it odd that you are God. I try to pry apart each indication that you suggest makes you the best. I can't stand your grandiosity. I demand that you more humble be. How can I ever think you're God when it's as clear can be? All the earth and sun is really run by me. Thank you, everyone, for tolerating. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So there you have the main techniques of REBT. Quickly now, I'd like to go over the handout you have, the pivotal elements in REBT sessions. And for those of you who observed me working with Erica or demonstrating with Erica last month, and again, my thoughts and wishes to courageous, amazing Erica. Think about how I applied some of these. So in a typical REBT session, the first step is to clarify the client's issues and therapeutic goals. Why are they there? You know, how can you help them? Really important, the second step, I'm going by the handout that you've got here. Listen well as much as possible, model REBT principles and practices such as empathy, compassion, and unconditional other acceptance. And when I say listen well, not just to their literal words, but notice their body language, their nonverbal behavior. Gather as much information as you can. 3, be alert, direct. And after you have educated them about the principles of REBT, point out to them every time, anytime you hear them thinking in self-defeating ways. That goes hand in hand with the fourth point of teaching them the REBT principles. Suggest reading material and know the techniques that I've shared with you tonight, and make it very clear to the client that to create and maintain lasting change requires ongoing effort. 5, when appropriate, use humor to keep things in perspective. 6, part of REBT therapy is giving homework. It is active directive. It is reminding the client it's not predominantly what happens in sessions that will contribute mostly to what changes them. Of course, that helps significantly, but it's how they apply it in their daily life in between sessions that really creates the major change. At the beginning of a next session, ask about the homework, listen to whether the client did or didn't do it and the results, or if they didn't do it, be very mindful of not coming across as a disappointed teacher or parent, but come across as an interesting detective. Well, not detective, because they may not like the police. Now, what I mean is, as an interested person, is that interesting? You know, we kind of agreed you do that. So I'm really fascinated. What were you telling yourself to prevent yourself from doing it? And just use it to explore. No reprimand, no criticism. And then 8, be flexible. As time goes on, maybe initially anxiety was the therapeutic goal to overcome, but then what's emerged is some guilt. So as you do the therapy, if new goals emerge, then work on them. And 9, be creative when exploring appropriate homework activities. 10, encourage any and every positive change, any little effort. And again, if there's relapse or resistance, normalize it and show compassion and be straightforward and constructive and keep looking for things to encourage, like Adlerian psychotherapy, which elements of Adlerian, as my late husband used to say and write are within REBT, and he gave credit, as I do, where credit is due: Adler, the Stoic philosophers, Eastern philosophers, contemporary philosophers of my husband's time, Skinner, John Dewey. So anyway, encouragement. 11, self-disclose. I mentioned this earlier. If appropriate and when appropriate, and only for the purpose of assisting the client. And finally, the more we practice, lucky us, REBT with clients, the more it reinforces it within ourselves and makes us effective in our daily lives. And also, if therapy isn't going the way we wish it would, if the client remains resistant or is a difficult customer, it helps us unconditionally accept ourselves and keep doing the best we can. So they're the pivotal aspects of typical REBT therapy. Now I'd like to quickly, I'm looking at the time, okay, talk about the unique qualities, and specifically I'm talking about in the psychotherapeutic world, and more specifically in terms of cognitive approaches. And as you've heard me say, REBT, in my view, is the most holistic of all the cognitive approaches. It's got it all, and I love that. So there are about 6 qualities very unique to REBT, and the first one is that whilst it is as scientific and evidence-based as more general CBT, it is more philosophical. It examines the client's philosophy of life and living and the beliefs therein, rational and irrational. So it's much more philosophical. Some people might say spiritual, which does not mean religious. Secondly, more than the other approaches, REBT emphasizes the importance and benefit of unconditional self, other, and life acceptance. Thirdly, the precision that REBT encourages when we are attending to our irrational beliefs in terms of disputing. REBT doesn't want us just to replace the irrational unhealthy with the rational healthy. It wants us first to dispute precisely, Socratically, logically, pragmatically, in the ways on your self-help form, and they're described there, and zap all credibility out of the irrational beliefs before we then work on replacing them and repeating the new healthy beliefs. The fourth one I've already said, REBT is the most holistic and humanistic. The fifth one, the strong emphasis on gratitude from the get-go was and is unique to REBT. I'm not saying that other cognitive approaches don't agree that these things are good, but from the get-go, REBT emphasized them. And finally, which is my segue into the history and development of REBT, it's unique in the ingenious way that my late husband coped with suffering and adversity throughout his life, and the ways that he discovered to help himself, married to research that he did, so much that he read, the combination formed REBT. First, it was called rational therapy in 1953, and then in the 1960s, it was called rational emotive therapy, RET. So if you ever look up early articles or books by my husband, it was then called rational emotive therapy. And then in 1993, to reflect its holism, my husband put in the E, and it became rational emotive behavior therapy. Now, CBT, what's missing the E? REBT has always and does put equal emphasis on the importance of understanding emotions, emotion education, as on cognitive change, and reminds us of the inseparable interplay between cognitions, emotions, and behavior. I was listening to the news earlier this afternoon, and here in New York, more and more schools are opening and in person. And a teacher was talking about, the headmaster was talking about the emotion education that not only the students, but the people who work at the school are invited to do now, to talk about their feelings. So, yay for that. Okay, so now very quickly, the history and development of REBT. If you want to know more detail, in many of my husband's books, in the primer that Dr. Derma mentioned last time that I wrote, where is it? It's got more about it, but I'll just give you the elevator version. This is a really tall building, but I'll go as quickly as I can. Okay, Albert Ellis suffered throughout childhood from illness, often in hospital on his own. As a child, parents rarely visited. He was very, very sad. He decided, actively chose not to feel as down and sad as he was. I mean, understandable. The other kids, their parents visited them in the hospital, not him. So he took action. He read books in the children's library in the hospital. He spoke to other children. He spoke to the people visiting the children. He daydreamed or night dreamed what he was going to do when he grew up, or of his famous, or of baseball heroes. He used to say he fell in love with all the nurses, even at a young age. And so he distracted himself from the sad facts. And so he felt less sad. And as you heard earlier, part of REBT is cognitive distraction. It's not elegant, but it's helpful. Then he was very, very shy. So he did what I already described to you, forced himself to do uncomfortably what he wanted to get comfortable at, got over his fear of talking to women. And also, when he was in college, he was voted president of a political group, which meant he had to talk in public. He was still very, very shy, afraid of doing a rotten job, and what if people criticize him, and fear of rejection. Again, it was his choice, and he pushed himself to do uncomfortably what he wanted to get comfortable at. And he spoke, and over time, a short time, he lost his fear because, first of all, people really listened, and he saw nothing terrible happened, and he actually enjoyed it, and he discovered he had a talent for it, which if he had succumbed to his fear, he would never have discovered his talent for public speaking. So in vivo desensitization and risk-taking. And then when he was 24 and he was madly in love with a young woman, mainly not young woman, but teenage, she was 18 or 19, Carol, and they were really, really close. But then at the end of a very intimate evening, she said to him, I think we need to have a break. I'm very young, blah, blah, blah. And it was the saddest he'd ever been. And he went for a walk around the Bronx Botanical Garden and had tears and feeling hopeless and despondent and didn't want to live without Carol. He wasn't suicidal, but he felt life would have no meaning without her. And he had an epiphany that it wasn't her rejection that was creating his despondency, but what he was telling himself. And he started thinking about what he was telling himself and questioning that. Where was the evidence that his life could never have meaning without her? Even if it was less happy, he liked helping people, he liked studying, he liked psychology. he could still have meaning. Where was the evidence he'd never fall in love again, even though at the time he thought he would never love anyone as much as Carol, which proved wrong. But at the time, he really believed it. But he said to himself, it's likely, even if I don't love anyone as much as her, I can still fall in love again. And so he was practicing disputing and noticing how his shoulds, the tyranny, Karen Horney's tyranny of the shoulds, and other irrational thoughts were creating his suffering. And so that became an elemental part of REBT theory, with, again, influence from the Stoics and Karen Horney, the tyranny of the shoulds, and the importance of disputing and thinking about our thinking. And so the final thing I'll say in terms of the history and development, I'm reading a lot, leaving a lot out in terms of wanting to save time. So do read more about it if you're interested. But when he first talked about REBT to his peers at the APA convention, the majority, if not all of them, were psychoanalytic, and they booed him and jeered him and said what he was saying was simplistic and superficial. And he practiced what he preached. It would have been lovely to have their approval, but he stayed tuned to what he passionately believed and persisted and didn't allow himself to be swayed by criticism. And thankfully, the cognitive revolution in psychotherapy was born. He had many challenges throughout his life. He applied REBT successfully. And at the end of his life, a huge challenge that a genius with a heart of gold in a perfect world, which doesn't exist, would not have had to endure. But for power and money, he was kicked out of his institute because directors wanted to go a certain direction and he didn't, and no time to elaborate, but he practiced what he preached. And in a New York Times article, the headline was "Behaviorists Behaving Badly." So it was New York Magazine, and he was quoted as saying, "I hate what they're doing, but I don't hate them." Unconditional other acceptance. He practiced what he preached till the end. Yay! So I've gone over all the material that serves the objectives of tonight's presentation, and now we have a little over 20 minutes. So obviously it can only be a quickie demonstration, but I wonder if tonight there's anyone brave enough, I don't want to do a role play, but anyone who right now is going through a challenge or difficulty that they think some REBT would help them overcome or deal with better. Is there anyone who would like to volunteer for a demo? And if there is not, okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat. So just a few more seconds. If anyone's on the borderline of volunteering, but you're feeling afraid, what are you telling yourself to hold yourself back from volunteering? And is it helping or hurting you? And if we all think you're ridiculous, which I highly doubt, what would be the horror of that? It would indicate we're a bunch of judgmental so-and-sos and nothing about you. So I'm just doing this kind of talking to see if there's anyone who wants to change their mind. All right. Okay, so are there any questions, or is there anything that any of you would like me to elaborate on or talk about further?
Do you have do you have any information? I know you posted the other video.
Ira, can you turn your camera on? Actually, could all of you turn your cameras on so we can
Well,
see?
you know what? I understand you cannot start your video. The host has okay, now it's letting me do it. At first it was saying that, oh, you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it. It's giving me a note saying the host has disabled it. So when I push to start the camera, okay, there you go.
Okay, thank you. And thank you others who, I love to see your faces. And those of you who are naked, get some clothes on and then turn your camera on, will you? Come on, what are you afraid of? Come on, thank you. Hi, Wendy. Ira, talk to me.
Do you have any more information other than the video? Because I didn't see the first video and I got it saved to watch it. I think it's an hour and 55 minutes. But do you have any other information that we can follow up with watching this? I think it's pretty interesting and I would like to add it to my tool belt.
I'd love you to add it to your tool belt. Yes, so I strongly recommend you look at the first one I did for GSU and the demonstration I did with Erica. Can you tell how much she touched my heart, everyone? Probably those who were there feel, I would guess you might feel the same. Anyway, so Ira, in addition to that, my website, so www.debbiejoffelis as one word.com, and I think it's on the handouts.
Okay.
There's a section there that has videos and a few interviews with me, and there's a presentation I did for Seton Hall University, and everyone, you might be interested too, that has another demonstration. So you can fast forward, you know, past me, blah, 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 on stage alone, then you'll see me sitting on chairs on the stage with someone. So that's another demo you might want to see. Seton Hall University. So you can look at videos there, Ira, and also I've written articles for Psychology Today, and they're all on my website too. And Ira and everyone, Google Albert Ellis videos and look at my husband in action. And there you go.
So thank you.
You are so welcome. And I think Brave, whose name I really enjoy. Hi, Brave. And then LaTonya and then Ashley. Wonderful. Yay. Okay, Brave. Brave. I love your name. Speak to me.
Thank you so much. That was great. And I love it. I love all of it. Two questions. So in our culture, it's really hard to buy into the concept of non-dualistic thinking and embracing it. Is there a place for community in this and to align with people that are going to practice the same thinking that does not really align with our Western values? So that's, you know, and
let's one at a time. Yeah. Can I answer that and then ask you someone? Yeah. There's room for it. There's such a need for it. And happily, I do hear certain principles coming out through the media and other fields, you know, other areas that stand on the shoulders of REBT, like positive psychology, CBT and all. There is an alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous called SMART, S-M-A-R-T. So it's secular. It's for people who want to overcome addiction, but don't feel comfortable, you know, giving over power to a higher power and some of the AA principles. To have REBT principles taught in schools. I mentioned what I saw on the news. I don't know if they know REBT, I hope so, but they're doing REBT stuff in welcoming. Let's look at what we're feeling. there's an area of REBT, and you can again Google it, Rational Emotive Behavior Education, books by Albert Ellis and Dr. William Knaus, and a man in Australia, Julio Bortolozzo, who in South Australia, he's a school counsellor and teaches or brings in REBE. So I hope you and everyone heard or were reminded tonight, Brave, that in a way, many of the principles, if not all, are common sense, you know, way back, not only BC before COVID, but, you know, BC before Christ or the Common Era. People, there was a wise man or a shaman in the community, or the priests or the rabbis or whoever who shared wisdom and you know, Confucius wisdom. And so I think REBT is very digestible in the community, in whichever groups. And that's why I love to teach it to as many people as possible, because each one of us, not just professionally, but might live our lives and spend time in different groups, hobby groups and circles, and can share the principles there.
And I don't want to take more time, but that segues into, you touched on spirituality. Do you find that at some point in time that there's a hindrance if you don't have a spiritual aspect to it?
Well, it's important to define what spiritual means. My husband called himself a probabilistic atheist. He said, I'm not going to say there is no God, but I want evidence before I say absolutely there is one. So some people would call that non-spiritual. Actually, I think he was one of the most spiritual people I knew. And his definition of spiritual, which many of us might share, is caring about and for other people, wanting to do no harm, wanting to do good. So there's a distinction between being spiritual and being religious. And so even if a person doesn't want to think of themselves as spiritual or religious, I think there are some heart values that a person who isn't severely disturbed will want to embrace and relate to. Thank you, Brave. LaTanya.
Oh, thank you. Good evening. I want to say thank you. I really enjoyed the seminar. I actually kind of didn't know how to answer the question earlier. I actually heard of the REBT in my last course, but it was brief because we went over 13, 14s and they were like this. And so imagine me seeing your name and I'm like, I know I've seen that before. So I just wanted to show you, if you can kind of see it, chapter 5, there's your name next to your husband's. We actually did bring
up the chapter.
Yeah, we went over your that particular section for just a few days. But I did want to ask a question in regards to the I guess age criteria that REBT would fit for. So my goal would be to work with adolescents. Is this a psychotherapy that I could use for adolescents, or is this strictly for adults? What do you think about that?
It is not strictly anything. By the way, I took that photo.
Did you?
Yeah, with a little Kodak Instamatic.
Oh, wow.
And now people steal it and use it wherever. I don't mean steal in a negative way, but yeah. Listen, LaTanya, it's even good for children, but one adopts the language, the words that the child or the teenager can relate to. Even with adults, if I'm working with an intellectual academic, I use a different manner and vocabulary than if I'm talking with someone who's just had very simple education. Mm-hmm. So we tailor ourselves. So some of the principles that's so important for children and adolescents to get is unconditional acceptance, that if you do a bad thing, there are going to be consequences, but listen, it doesn't make you bad. Every human can make mistakes? Who hasn't? You know, and you talk with them, and not in a silly, patronizing way like I just sounded, but you get what I mean?
Yes.
So you can teach even children. Actions have consequences, but you have worth no matter what. And in terms of emotions, teaching them to pay attention. What am I feeling now? I would wait till a child is a teen and shows evidence that they can understand the difference between healthy negative and unhealthy negative emotions, but that usually comes if the child isn't has difficulty with learning or learning difficulties is what I meant to say, and has other conditions that can make understanding that difficult. But many teenagers can comprehend it. But for little kids, what REBE, Rational Emotive Behaviour Education, recommends is have a colour to represent each emotion. And you can ask the child or the teen, so what colour are you today? You know, and talk about it. And then talk about, so what were you thinking before the red, meaning rage or very angry, happened? And introduce now, see, it wasn't your big brother, but it was what you were telling yourself. So yes, it's marvellous and important for children as soon as they're able to comprehend some of the principles, and teens. And by the time they're late teens, they can probably understand all the main principles of REBT. I'm not talking about how to use it for people with schizophrenia. I'm talking about for everyday life. And there's a book, I don't have it on hand. Look it up, by Albert Ellis and Michael Bernard, on REBT for adolescents. It might even be for children, adolescents. So there you go.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. And I think, was it Ashley, who I don't even see anymore? Or who there was a third person. It was Brave and Latonya. Ashley, did you have a question?
It was like 10 minutes ago. I raised my hand to.
I can't hear you, sorry.
You can't hear me?
Oh, can you talk louder? I can hear you faintly.
Oh, my speaker.
Okay. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I raised my hand like 10 minutes ago because I was like wanted to do the role play, but now it's like we ran out of time. So yeah.
Oh, I didn't, obviously, because yeah, I was asking for questions. And gee, what's the issue, Ashley, if you don't mind saying?
My issue is that I've been like a straight A student since high school, and I'm in college, and the 2 years I've been at Governor State, I've maintained that. But it's like sometimes when it's like really close, like I have like a 92 or 91, and it's like I'm right at that brink of getting a B. It's like I feel like I failed. And so, yeah, it's like really stressful. It's like having that, it has to be perfect type of mentality. Like that's very stressful for me.
By the way, that's very common. And I teach at Columbia Uni, and I have a number of students who will challenge me when they get an A minus instead of an A. An A minus is pretty good. So you're not alone in that need for perfection. Okay, thank you for bringing that up. So, Ashley, how do you feel when you think you're not going to get an A?
Extremely angry, like I want to fight somebody.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hooray for virtual teaching, right? I'm joking. Okay, so what might you be telling yourself, Ashley, to make yourself so angry? Because if it was the condition of maybe not getting an A, then every student would feel enraged at that possibility. But does every student feel enraged about that possibility?
No.
Okay. So what might you, in all your passion and determination to do great, what might you be telling yourself to make yourself so angry?
Like sometimes I either get mad at myself, like you are lazy because you didn't manage your time wisely. Like you spent so much time on your phone and you didn't manage your time, so you didn't have the time to do what you were supposed to do. Or sometimes I get mad at the professor, like, oh, if it was a different professor, they wouldn't grade so harshly, and so it's either that. It's either I blame myself or I blame the professor. But most of the time I blame myself. Most of the time.
Yeah, where's that getting you, Ashley?
It's more stressed out than I need to be.
Yeah, yeah. Is it helping you?
Not at all.
Okay. So I have an impression, tell me if I'm wrong. These are my words, but that you think something along the lines of, I should always do perfectly well. And if I don't, it proves I'm not good enough.
And that sums it up.
Okay. First of all, I'm not arguing with you about I think the fact that it would be preferable that you do really, really well. It's great. It feels good and it's helpful and it's practical to do well. Yeah. But where is it written that you should always do perfectly well?
It's not written anywhere. It's written somewhere in my head, but
That's where it's written. Yeah, yeah. So is it a scientific fact? Is it an objective fact or just something, as you said, written in your head?
yeah, it's just in my head. Like, well, my thought is that it's so many people in the world, and especially with psychology, it's like it's a growing profession, a growing field, and everybody's so much competition. So it's like you just feel the pressure to be so much better than everybody else. So
No.
that's mainly.
Yeah, yeah. No, you feel the pressure to be better than everyone else.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, can you prove to me that it sounds like your goal is to be an excellent psychologist. Is that
In the future.
Yeah, because you mentioned that it's a growing field. Do you think every effective psychologist got straight A's?
Maybe probably not in the gen years, but probably in psychology, maybe. I'm pretty sure they did.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. They didn't. No, they didn't. Shannon and Pat, two professors, do you know any effective psychologists who didn't get straight A's? Like, do you know a ton of them?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm brilliant and I didn't get straight A's.
I was going to say the same thing.
Right, right. So, Ashley, would you be willing to consider that it's not necessary to get straight A's to be an effective psychologist or therapist or anything in life? Would you be willing to consider that?
Yeah, I could.
Okay. Secondly, Ashley, let's say you get B minus. Is your anxiety rising already when I say that? C, A minus. Does that mean if that were to happen, as if, you would have any less worth than if you got straight A's?
Not my worth as a person, but I just feel very disappointed, like I could have did more. or I should have did something to avoid that.
Right, shoulda. Now, disappointment would be healthy, but you told me you got really, really, really angry. REBT isn't about being happy when we don't achieve what we want, if what we want is healthy. And you have a healthy ambition, but you're hurting yourself by needing to do perfectly well all the time. Now, if you had a child, I don't know if you want to have children, but
Someday.
someday, okay. If you could reflect on you give birth or you adopt a beautiful baby, a beautiful little baby, and at 10 months or something, he or she starts walking and then they fall on their nappied ass. Oh, nappy, by the way, in Australia, that means diaper, sorry, on their diapered ass. And they're 11 months and they're still not walking properly. Would you be angry at them?
No.
Why not? I mean,
You just-
shouldn't they be walking better?
No. Well, with little kids, they all develop differently.
Ah, and let's say your child was at school and didn't get straight A's. Now, if you don't change yourself, my hunch is you might be angry at your child if they don't. But let me ask you to be objective. And would it be healthy to be angry at your child if he or she didn't get straight A's?
No.
Why not?
Because well, it depends on what they did get. Like if they, got C's and D's or on mostly B. It just depends too much. But I would know their potential. And so I would be angry if I knew that they had the potential to do better and they just didn't because they just didn't feel like putting in the effort. That is what would make me angry.
No, your attitude would make you angry. Now, do you think your anger would encourage the child to do better?
No, it was
No.
definitely not.
No. So what would help your child to do better?
For me to be encouraging and accepting of them.
Yeah, that would do the trick. I remember there was a subject when I was in sixth grade, and I always excelled in school, but it was a maths test, and I didn't do real well. And I came home crying because I didn't want to disappoint my parents. And my father was so patient and encouraging. If he had been angry, I think it would have been negative. But because of his encouragement, I just tried harder and did better. And you've just said you think that would work for a child of yours. Ashley, would you be willing to change your attitude to yourself when you don't get straight A's in that way?
Yeah, I could. Because I just feel like dumb if I don't, do as well as I want to. But I could stop thinking that way and stop being so upset and like just replace that with just being, disappointed, but not to the point where it's stressing me out and making me so angry that I'm thinking all types of thoughts that I shouldn't be thinking.
Preferably shouldn't be thinking, yeah, I'm sorry, we're a few minutes at time. Sorry. If I can just finish this, and apologies, Shannon and Michelle. Ashley, I urge you to keep things in perspective. You have done so well. I almost want to say try and get an A- for some paper and see if the world ends or if you're really disadvantaged. Realistically, I don't know that you will do that. But what I urge you to remind yourself every day is, if you choose to just focus on the activity, and if you don't do as well as you wish, you're to be disappointed. But think bigger. It's really probably not going to impact the quality of your life. And I also encourage you to look at research people who failed at school and had incredibly successful lives. Didn't Stephen Jobs do a lousy job? Someone did. Anyway, I hope you'll consider that and do your ABCDE on it. And your dedication, by the way, already, see, it's not your straight A's that are going to make you superb at what you do. It's your dedication. And you can be just as dedicated and get an A- or a B now and then. Good luck, Ashley, and thank you for volunteering. Everyone, I'm sorry for going over time, and thank you for having me. And remember daily gratitude and enjoy life. So over to Shannon, I guess.
We enjoyed you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you, Brave. I don't know if you want to say anything to thank you, Ahmet. And REBT and Buddhism have much in common. Yes. Shannon, I don't know if you want to finish off.
I know that's the end of the workshop. We do have a recording, and so I believe Michelle next week will send out an email to everyone that signed up and give them a link to the recording in case you want to rewatch it. And then also we had already sent out the link for the last one in case you hadn't seen that. That's where Dr. Joffe Ellis really described the basics of REBT. And then, of course, if you joined us late, although I think everyone was here in the beginning, quickly scroll back up before I close this all out. There's a bunch of handouts in the beginning that you can download from the chat. If you don't know how to do that, you just click on chat at the bottom. It should pop up and then scroll up to the top and you can download those. But if for some reason you miss it, you could email Michelle Sabasco, who had emailed you all the link, and ask her for those handouts, or for some reason she doesn't have them, I can always get them from Dr. Joffe Ellis. I think that's it. If you have, everyone said thank you, Dr. Joffe Ellis, they enjoyed it. And so thank you for joining us. And like I said, if you have any questions, obviously my name is up there, Shannon Dermer, sdermer at govst.edu. I'm the Dean of the College of Education.
GSU.
GSU. Governor State right there. You can see it in the background. So thank you, everyone. I thank you for attending, and you can sign out. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, guys.
You too, Ira.
Thank you.
Bye, Pat. Bye, everyone. Bye. Pat, can we stay on Michelle and Shannon for 2 seconds?
Is Michelle still on? Oh,
I'm here.
Oh, you are. Because I know she
I'm
had to leave for a while.
multitasking, man.
Yeah.
Multitasking. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I get that. She had one of her colleagues help a little bit.
All right. Is Karen going to leave or?
There she's gone.
Sorry for going over. I wish Ashley had volunteered earlier.
Well, she also could have put it in the chat, but that's okay. Yeah, I didn't see anyone volunteer. You gave it a long time to, yeah.
Any feedback? I hope that was all right.
Oh yeah, it was great. And thank you for all the handouts. That always helps the students. And then again, like we said, we'll send out, and by we, I mean Michelle, the one who does all the work. We'll send out a link to the recording to them also. So,
Yeah, in that email, I'll include the handouts again, and I'll
Great.
also include the link for the first video. So I got you. I
Great.
got you.
That's awesome. Thank
I'll
you.
take good care of our students.
Good. So that's great. So yeah, no, it was great. I wish that it's always hard when we make something free, then we have a lot of people who don't show up where they're just like, oh, I could go out to dinner with my friend, or, but still we had 22 people is a nice turnout for a workshop on a Friday evening. But yeah, that always frustrates me a little bit. It's not you. It happens all the time where people sign up for a free one and then they just don't show up. So.
Yeah, it does. It's just one of those things. But like Shannon said, it was a really good turnout. So I mean, I think for a Friday night, really good turnout. So, and I'll send the video out to the other people that couldn't make it too. So.
Right. So they still might watch it, and certainly if you attach the handouts, they'll usually look at the handouts and stuff also.
Yeah.
Right. Well, again, by the way, Shannon, I wanted to say, but I didn't think it was appropriate with the whole group. Your haircut was fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.